So, welcome to the Evolve Fitness podcast. Today we have a very special guest, someone I really look up to, who is Thom Evans, bodybuilder, soon in the open division. So, from classic to open.
Yeah, we're in the process of going from classic to open, correct?
Yeah, currently building a lot of muscle mass to step on the open stage. And physique collective coach, which is very important to mention. Also, dad of two cute Westies and based in Vienna right now, but soon in UK. So, do you have anything to add? Did I miss anything?
No, that's right. First of all, an athlete. I'm a bodybuilder. I also do online coaching with female athletes primarily. I am a father of two West Highland White Terriers. I am moving back to Manchester in England, and I am bulking for the next like 18 months probably.
Yeah, for sure. But you're getting super well. Like you're progressing very, very good. So,
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Joe, my coach, is a bit of a wizard. I keep getting leaner and bigger, but
which is crazy. It's insane.
it's quite a good lesson because after the prep last year, I took a lot of downtime. I didn't train overly hard. I trained for fun. I didn't track food. Obviously, at a certain point of food experience, you don't really need to track food to know almost what your macros are. So I just basically maintained on clean food. We kept the drugs really low. And we just did it for a long time. We did a few little specialization blocks where we'd prioritize some body parts, but we didn't push food we didn't push drugs or anything. And then I had like a 6-week kind of real chill out period before we started the massing phase. So drugs like absolutely down to nothing or near nothing, just enough to maintain normal hormonal function. Food high, because my food is always high, but just to maintain the body weight. And we did what calls like training maintenance volumes. So you've got this like very little amount of stimulus that actually you really need to maintain a muscle. And then, the advanced athlete, what you might need to grow a muscle is actually probably quite a lot more stimulus than that. And
Absolutely.
then, and what often happens, athletes tend to stall out is because they sort of sit about here, they're doing like 80, 90% of what they need to actually genuinely grow. And they're doing that simply because the amount required per body part has become a lot. So you simply can't do all the body all at once because you'd be training beyond a recoverable amount, right? You'd be training 4 to 6 hours a day, every day, and you couldn't keep up with the food, the sleep, you probably after 1 week, you'd need a week's rest, and this would become like inefficient. So all we started to do was just pick out, okay, for the next 4 weeks, let's just push some additional volume through the biceps. And then, all of my other resources are allocated just to maintaining muscle. And the biceps are getting a lot of nutrition and stimulus. They can grow effectively.
Yeah, which is something you have to do when you're advanced. But when you're a beginner or just intermediate, I think you can hit everything quite well and just grow overall because you need to grow everything. So I would say maybe more for advanced people.
Yeah, although one thing I would say for beginners and stuff is do recognize that oppositional muscle groups don't require symmetrical volumes. So, just deciding arbitrarily that if you do 6 sets of biceps, you must do 6 sets of triceps, or 12 sets of chest goes with 12 sets of back. This is quite common in programming, right? But I tell you now, quads need a lot less than hams as a rule. Chest needs a lot less than back. Biceps need a lot more than triceps. And your calves probably need more volume than you're willing to do in order to grow them. And, most people say they've got bad calf genetics, but it's simply a matter of acceptance that certain body parts like abs and calves that you're not gifted with, is they will grow. But what you might have to do to get them to grow is a lot more of a commitment than you've been giving them.
Yeah, and you have to work them hard as you can train your quads or your chest. Like so many people are just doing calves body weight, and you're like, use some weights, do like 6 reps, 10 reps, 12, 5, 15, like all the rep ranges and all the loads ranges and everything. Like train hard.
Yeah, and particularly with the girls. Okay, there's loads of guys walking around with big thighs and shitty calves, and this is unacceptable.
Yeah,
But the girls often neglect calves
I
too.
agree.
And if you want to look killer in heels, really do some calf training. Is about 8 sets a week for calves that's going to get them actually growing. And it's
Yeah,
about 4 sets to maintain them. So all you need to do is put the effort in to get them to, a good size. They look good in heels, and then you just do 2 sets twice a week. It's nothing to maintain them. So
yeah, 100%. Especially for bikinis and like athletes, because on stage you wear heels for figure, bikini, and wellness. And if you have big calves, it looks so much better.
yeah, I mean, it's just balance. It's balance, and I don't understand why one body part would be neglected. Everyone can have their own aesthetic and ideas of aesthetics. But in my
Yeah.
opinion, calves are an important part of the physique, as are forearms, biceps, triceps, etc. And okay, great. If you're gifted them, great. If you are not, then you need to train them.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, let's dig into today's topic. So we are going to start talking about the enhancement journey. When you start using PEDs, how can you use them the best way possible, the most optimal way possible, and male versus female, because it's so different. And I think it's not really covered for female. Usually, you did the podcast, which was amazing lately, but I think it's important to just bring both in the same podcast and talk about both. Like as a male, when you want to start PEDs, what can you do? And also as a female, what can you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, rather than focus on the differences, there are a lot of similarities, although the traditional approaches might be different. So, first of all, we can differentiate when we say PEDs, performance enhancing drugs. A lot of people are going to hear steroids. All right, so that's the immediate leap they're going to make. But caffeine is a performance enhancing drug. It's limited
Yeah,
by
true.
WADA. Okay, and how much caffeine an Olympic athlete can use is regulated and measured. So
Hmm.
there's plenty of ergogenic aids that might help with training performance. These are performance enhancing. There's plenty of things that you can take that will be also physique enhancing. And this is the world that we are in, is that yes, we want performance enhancement because training is kind of critical. We eat for performance, we sleep for performance, we manage stress for performance. So drugs that will help performance are very important, but there's also plenty of drugs that will elicit a more favorable body composition as well. And so we shouldn't just leap first in the first instance of steroids necessarily, although testosterone would probably be a given. So we would start there with a testosterone base.
Yeah, for
Males,
males.
so and for females, depending on their
Yeah,
blood
on blood
test
work.
results.
Yeah,
So in a male and a female, first of all, let's take a blood test and let's see where they sit on the sex hormone and probably the thyroid panel, right? Those are the two things as a physique coach I'm going to be particularly interested in when we talk about drug deployment. And there's all sorts of other things that you might look up on a blood test as a physique coach, but in terms of making sure your client's healthy and actually safe to use
yeah, yeah,
steroid. If a client has hypertension and terrible cholesterol and they decide they want to start steroids, and we're just compounding a serious medical issue that's not been dealt with. So you need to
yeah,
resolve the issues, maybe resolve health issues first. So we can put that in as a caveat. Okay, the client in this example is fit, healthy, well. They've never taken any kind of performance enhancing drugs before that they really know about. They've probably had nicotine and caffeine.
yeah.
Cocaine potentially could be a performance drug.
Potentially.
Maybe somebody took quite a bit of cocaine before they did a 500 kilo deadlift. Who knows?
It can happen. Yeah, who knows?
who knows the story behind that one, but that was some intensity on stage. Okay, so we're talking about, first of all, we have a blood test. And so with a male, it comes back as low testosterone. Or with a female, it comes back as low testosterone. So first of all, there's a big opportunity in just putting them at the top end of the normal spectrum.
Yeah.
Now, their body will naturally convert testosterone to estrogen in the way that it does, but that will also be within their natural sort of biological environment. So really, you wouldn't need to make too much adjustments to see some progression in body composition without even touching weights, let alone eating a bodybuilding diet that's high in protein and carbohydrates and training for, performance. So that would be my first port of call.
So first you will start with TRT.
Potentially, if they're low on testosterone.
Okay, but if they are normal, for example, for a female to be normal or male to be normal testosterone, would you because for a female, you won't do any TRT if she's okay with testosterone because it's so androgenic, you will avoid it. But for a male, if he has normal testosterone and wants to get enhanced, you should go a bit higher with testosterone to be supraphysiological, to have something more, because I don't think it's really worth it to be on TRT if you have normal tests, to just have a bit more. I think for males just can go on full on, because it's okay for them to take testosterone because they have them in a huge amount, and it's not really detrimental compared to women.
Well, I mean, the normal range is substantially different to what the normal range would have been 50 years ago. So our hormonal profiles affected by plastics, parabens, estrogen in the water supply, birth control pills. If you're on the pill, and an estrogen pill as a female, that's suppressing your testosterone, right? So if you're on the birth control, if your birth control method is an estrogen pill, then you're probably on the back foot when it comes to your most important, your largest sex hormone, right? So still in females, testosterone is a very, very effective PED up to the top end of the normal range. And never beyond.
Totally.
Never beyond, unless you're interested in embarking upon a sex change. So let's not talk about gender politics or anything like that, but hormonally speaking, at the point where a woman decides to transition to a man, should be put on testosterone replacement equivalent to what a normal man would be on, which is about 100 milligrams of test a week. So top end of the normal range of TRT for a female. My client Sarah's taking 4 milligrams a week and she's right on the top end. All right. It's a bit individual. So you might take 4 milligrams and be, sort of 70% to the top of the range, and she might say, okay, I can get a bit more benefit from going 5 milligrams. All right. This will have an impact, but as you say, it's probably not super necessary in terms of where a female might start. I would still really be conscious of looking at that. I like to set up a stable hormonal base for females.
Yeah.
With males, then I'm going to say, okay, a normal tolerable range for testosterone without seeing side effects, without having to manage estrogen, because managing estrogen through aromatase inhibitors or selective estrogen receptor modulators is going to be quite detrimental to your cholesterol, your general health. And also quite deleterious to your physique goals, because tanking your estrogen's not good. Estrogen's good for building muscle. It's good for lipolysis. It's good for libido, So we want to ensure quite a high quality of life generally, and that includes quality sex life, quality mood. It shouldn't just be called performance enhancement in the gym. This bodybuilding should be fun, and we have all these tools at our disposal. If we get them right, then it's living your greatest life.
Absolutely.
If you get them wrong, it will yield less gains than you could have while being miserable and feeling like crap all the time. So
Yeah.
deployment of the steroids in particular is really important. So let's take a male and let's start him on. So he comes back, he's in the normal range for testosterone. We're pretty happy. We're not going to get any benefits from just TRT. So we just move him on to 200 milligrams of testosterone. Okay, that's fine. And then our other probably steroid of choice, injectable, can be Masteron or Primobolan. And that's just going to balance the androgen to estrogen ratio, okay? So testosterone is going to convert to estrogen, and it's quite androgenic. So you've got the androgens pushed up here, but you've also got estrogen being pushed up the more that you take. And at a certain point, you'll start to see estrogenic side effects. And those all require management. So let's say when estrogen's high, when you're on your period, your retention of sodium is higher, therefore your excretion of sodium is lower, and therefore your food retention is higher. That's why often on your period you'll be like, oh, fuck, I gained 5 pounds in 2 days and I feel like crap.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, one way to manage that is actually to lower your sodium during that time, because you hang on to more anyway. Anyway, that's a side point. So men will start to have those same sort of side effects at a certain point. And so we probably put in an anabolic that doesn't increase estrogen, but does increase androgen. So Primobolan and Masteron are quite good for that. And also like really thoroughly researched in medical literature, testosterone, Primobolan, Masteron as treatments for breast cancer and contraception. So we know a lot about them. We know what happens when you take quite a lot of them. We've got fantastic studies on testosterone where they gave 600 milligrams a week to college kids. And I mean, they did this as a control study where some of the kids had none, just fake, or just oil, and some of the kids had 600 milligrams. I'm telling you now, right, if you get 600 milligrams of test, you know you're not on the placebo. 100%.
Yeah,
100%. I mean, especially in the first week, those guys would have been like walking around with like, I mean, full morning wood, probably.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
The libido, the initial rise in libido would have been insane. So
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, as well as motivation and drive. Okay, so we've got those components to play with up to a point, and that's going to be like goal dependent and where they are. Essentially, as a novice, you want to get the most out of the least. So, okay, get them growing on 200 milligrams of testosterone and eating up until the point where maybe the body composition starts to slide. It's 200 milligrams of testosterone is not going to do any damage. So get pushing the food, they're gaining weight nicely, assuming they started with a good body composition, you're massing. If they're dieting on that, you're just reducing the food until they're in a good state of a body composition. You don't need to make any changes to the drugs because 200 milligrams of testosterone is plenty to maintain muscle. And as a first time user, they probably even build muscle while in a deficit. So body composition starts to skew. We've got two options there. We can pull food down and move into a mini cut, which isn't particularly a productive use of time for building muscle, or we can use one of our other avenues of progression, which would be to increase the steroids. Right?
Yeah.
So if they're on 200 tests, probably what I would do there is at that point introduce Primobolan at 100 milligrams. And I'd be checking on their libido primarily, just to sense check how that was sitting with them. And then I've got room really within this window to move testosterone between 200 and 400 milligrams. And Primobolan, I can probably also move between 200 and 400 milligrams. So somewhere between 3 parts testosterone to 2 parts DHT drug, or sort of a 1-to-1 ratio. Somewhere within there will be the sweet spot for normal sort of sexual function, just depending on their conversion of testosterone to estrogen. All right.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, Because for me, the main model I know is just you start with testosterone, like for a male, 200 milligrams, and then you just run it for as long as it works, as long as you progress on it. Then you plateau a bit and you just increase testosterone until you have estrogenic side effects. Or, for example, from 200 to 300 milligrams a week, you run it for a month until you don't progress anymore, then maybe to 400, you see any like some estrogenic side effects, so you're like, okay, I stay at 350, maybe a bit lower, just to be out of the estrogenic side effects. And then you introduce some DHT derivatives, so masteron, primobolan, or stuff like that.
I mean, certainly you
What do you think
could be
about this
you
model?
could be reactive to biofeedback, but you're also then relying on the client actually understanding, having never used steroids before,
Hmm.
what good looks like, right?
Okay.
That can often come
Yeah.
with experience, personal experience of tweaking your own stack design. So
Hmm.
I would tend to be like maybe more inclined to move in 50 milligram increments. Um,
Okay.
Using that ratio of sort of 2-to-1, 3-to-2, 1-to-1, working somewhere within there. So, of course, I've started with higher testosterone. So I could come
Hmm.
in from Mobilan at 50 milligrams, maybe push it to 200, then testosterone could creep to 250. But
Okay.
this is all in the scenario that the body composition started to decline. So
Yeah.
we've got all of this runway for now. A beginner cycle, there's absolutely no reason why that needs to stay at 200 milligrams until they get super fat, right?
Hmm.
It's absolutely fine. They can go to 5-6 milligrams per kilo, absolutely fine. And their health
Yeah.
markers, long term. Let's talk long term anyway. Steroids are not going to massively affect your health markers in the long term. They're going to affect them
Yeah.
acutely, but when you come off them, as long as you've been eating clean and everything like that, you're going to be fine. Now, if you've spent your bodybuilding career eating shit 9 months of the year and getting overly fat, you're going to have exactly the same kind of plaque deposits and arterial buildup and cholesterol issues that a sedentary obese person would have. So yes, they are linked to cardiovascular disease, and we really need to keep an eye on those things. But it, like we're in physique development, so the goal of that beginner is not to simply bodybuild on 200 milligrams of testosterone. Their goal is probably to achieve their desired physique in as
Yeah.
optimal a time frame as possible without shortening their lifespan.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would probably play within reasonable, tolerable dosages with a beginner. And then in male and females, the polypharmacy model is probably the main thing that's going to drive progression. So
Yeah. So you
So
limit
we're a
the
little bit
ratio.
limited with what we want to do with steroids, particularly in the beginning. And as you get bigger, you need more to maintain, you need more to grow. And that's where you start to make decisions about risk and reward. Do you have the structure? Do you have the muscle bellies? Do you have the look to actually make it worthwhile that you push? Or are you going to be more of a lifestyle bodybuilder, in which case moving between 1 milligram per kilo body weight and 5 milligrams per kilo body weight is sufficient anabolics and will not shorten your life. It's going to be fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
100-kilo male can maintain on 100 milligrams test a week for all of his recovery periods. And if he's going to diet and wants to maintain muscle, he might use 200 milligrams a week. And if he's in a massing phase, he might titrate up as high as 500 milligrams a week, only increasing in 50 milligram increments
Mhm.
as body composition skews. So you just simply keep food the same and add 50 milligrams of test a week. Your body composition should improve, right?
Yeah, for sure. So for you, just escalate both at the same time, like test and primo masteron. So you just go like that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I probably wouldn't go like, okay, let's increase test and primo at once.
Okay. Yeah.
I'd probably be picking one or the other depending on what ratio I'm at. So if I'm at 1-to-1 test to primo, and I need to make an increase, it will be test. So
Okay.
I always want to keep my test a little bit higher, or at least the same as
Mhm.
my DHT, because otherwise In my opinion, the androgen testosterone ratio isn't favorable to mood, happiness, drive, and libido. All right.
Okay. Okay.
What will happen with a male? Let's say that we put them on 300 milligrams of testosterone, but 1,000 milligrams of
Mhm.
primobolan. They would really struggle with erection quality. So they'd start experiencing sexual dysfunction. They'd probably also
Mhm.
start to feel somewhat depressed, low, drive and motivation would diminish.
Mhm.
You wouldn't feel
Okay.
good. And if you're not feeling good, your training performance and dietary adherence and just general what you get out of bodybuilding isn't going to work either. So this should be a consideration with the drug deployment. Why would we use nandrolone? It's neurotoxic as fuck, and it's
Yeah.
a less favorable profile than testosterone. Okay, maybe for a
Mhm.
female as a choice of anabolic, it's more favorable than testosterone, but it's still not the most favorable anabolic,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
You have way better.
and and it will cause significant virilization.
Yeah.
So then we can talk about this polypharmacy model. So we're supporting with appropriate deployment of growth hormone, which it'll
Mhm.
depend on whether you're massing or dieting, but it's going to be in the region of 2 units per a day, two to
Yeah.
four
Yeah.
units a day,
Yeah. Too far.
depending on the
Yes.
size of the individual and the goal. I mean, if you're just doing a diet and fat loss, probably for most people's body weight, 1 unit in the morning
It's
before
enough.
active
Yeah.
cardio that's all you need. It's just fat mobilization. Anything else is not, it's not really doing anything. So we've got things that manage oxidative stress primarily, like metformin. This is
Mhm.
a really big deal, for bodybuilders. Why do we get skin issues? Why do we get um, these kind of like anxious feelings, all of this kind of stuff? There's this buildup of oxidative stress. It can be in the brain, it can be in the body. Why do we get digestive issues? I mean, it's happening because of training, food
Mhm.
volumes, and number one, steroids. All right. Why do all bodybuilders seem to have fucking bad digestion? It's not. I mean, it isn't. It's not the food in a lot of cases. That is something to consider, but chronic reflux and bloating out on normal foods and being intolerant to everything left, right, and centre is simply a histamine response. So you're just taking too many steroids for your gut to handle. So if
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
require that many steroids, then you're going to need a histamine blocker.
Mm.
Simple as that. You're going to have. This is where we get into like whenever you get into management of your use via ancillaries. I'm taking so much testosterone, I need an anti-estrogen. This is stupid. It's shit. I'm taking so
Yeah.
much steroids that I need a histamine blocker to manage my digestion. Okay, maybe you do, but really we need to check on your goal there, because if you're doing your first ever amateur show and you're on,
Yeah. Like,
yourself on
what
three
next?
3 grams of, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. I didn't
Yeah,
do
I
a
agree.
show before moving up to NPC Classic, and even on then, actually, I topped out 500 milligrams a week on every single diet I've ever done,
Mm.
and most of them have been lower. Dieting doesn't
Yeah.
require so much anabolics unless you're doing something extremely aggressive, like 4 weeks of protein sparing modified fasting, because you've decided to get shredded for a show, like Leon did,
Yeah.
which was fucking impressive. And the man did one
Yeah.
week.
Yeah.
The man did 1 week on 4 protein shakes a day.
It's crazy.
Can you imagine? 200
Yeah.
grams of
Yeah.
protein a day. That's it for a week. Most people couldn't do that half a day.
Yeah. It's extremely hard. It's
Okay.
extremely hard. But also, like, I wanted to say something about like drawing the line between, okay, I want to go like full on because I want to compete on the Olympia, or I want just to look good in everyday life but not really push things. Because as a beginner, I think you have to try. If you want to try and you're sure about it, you want to really go for it for enhancement and PDUs, go for it, try for a few months and just assess how your body reacts. Because if it's not worth it, and if you have to go ham with drugs from the beginning to have a significant response, it's not worth it, because later on, as you said, you won't have any room for progression because you'll have to use huge doses, and it's so detrimental for your health that it's not really worth it in the end. So I think as a beginner, you really have to see how your body responds, and if your genetics is good enough for like PDUs, and really bringing it to the next level.
Yeah. So let's clarify on that, and then we'll come back to the polypharmacy model, because that ties over to the female use as well. So
Mhm.
to be a professional bodybuilder, you need three things: a certain skeletal structure. You need to respond ridiculously well to more or less any kind of stimulus fire resistance training. All right. And you need to
Yeah.
have a ridiculously good response to anabolics. These are the genetic gifts of a bodybuilder. If I take a
Hmm.
small amount of anabolic steroids, I grow like fuck. I often get leaner too. This is happening right now. I
Yeah.
now I'm ecto-meso, so unfortunately I have to eat a lot to gain mass, like 1,000 carbs a day. So another factor might be your response to food, but
Oh.
your ability to eat, how stressed you are, your
Hmm.
skeleton. What happens when you go to the gym? Just look at weight and you blow up. What happens when you look at
Yeah.
150 milligrams of primo? You blow up. That's what makes a pro bodybuilder. So as a beginner, right, you cannot say, right, I want to be the next Mr. Olympia. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll take whatever they need to take. Yes,
Hmm.
those big guys do get up to pretty high doses just to maintain, and even to make improvements. And they're probably taking more than they actually need to as well in some cases, because what kind of guidance is out there? Just old
Yeah.
school bodybuilding coach. I mean, some coaches good, some coaches bad, but one of the typical things with male bodybuilding is let's throw as much drugs at it as possible and see what happens.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same hit and hope approach as female birth control, which is also
Yeah. Yeah.
ridiculous. Um,
Yeah.
so what I would say is, like, within about 4 weeks of working with a client who's gone from natural to enhanced, I'd know if they had the potential to have a marketable physique.
Okay.
All right. So it doesn't need to be like they're going to compete or be at the Olympia, but could they make money off this? And then
Hmm.
and do they want to, then the risk to reward kind of changes a little bit. Right. So
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
I'm going for a competitive physique in open bodybuilding. I have a marketable physique, it will get more marketable. The risk to reward is there. I can potentially have a higher quality of life, more money, blah, blah, blah. These kind of things. I have a conversation with my coach about it. It's okay. Within reason, we're going to compromise our health for this particular goal. And we're
Yeah.
also be
And it's
clear.
worth it.
Yeah, and we're also going to be clear about our exit strategy. And at the end of the day, appropriate use isn't about abuse. I mean, we are abusing steroids, let's be clear, but appropriate use isn't about safer use. It's about how much of an individual needs and doing it in the most intelligent way properly. So if I'm popping anadrol, halotestin, and trenbolone, I'm not really doing anything that builds muscle, but I'm
Mhm.
seriously harming my health.
Yeah.
I might be taking 1,000 milligrams of steroids that aren't building any muscle tissue but damaging my health. So
Mhm.
if I took all of that from primobolan, then great. Or primobolan and anavar, why not? Good muscle building steroids, proven muscle building
Yeah.
steroids with this binding affinity for muscle, as opposed to
Yeah.
trenbolone likes to bind in the brain. So
Everything. Everywhere.
yeah, exactly. And we don't have the information about this stuff. Like, so where we know where steroids are binding in terms of muscle, but where else are they binding? What we really
Mm.
have there is anecdote to rely on. How do male bodybuilders feel when they take trenbolone in certain doses? How do male bodybuilders feel when they take nandrolone in certain doses? How do male
Mhm.
bodybuilders feel when they take a certain ratio of testosterone to another drug? And then we can come back to what's well medically researched, and we can put those together and have people taking up to maybe even 3 grams of gear but it's as effectively deployed as possible, and it comes from testosterone, primobolan, masteron, and anavar.
Yeah.
And probably only really reaching for the anavar just because simply route of administration is you've
Yeah,
run out of places to inject
yeah.
yourself, and you're getting a bit bored of sticking needles in you every day. And let's be clear, you know, that's a big part of it, and it's not particularly
Yeah.
fun. What we'll do generally with beginners is we'll downplay the steroid component, but we will use every other available performance enhancing drug in its minimum effective dose that we can.
Mhm.
That would be our injectable L-carnitine, our metformin, our
Yeah.
angiotensin receptor blocker. My preference is telmisartan, as you know.
Yeah, testosterone, yeah.
Growth hormone, if I mentioned it.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did.
Yeah, and then potentially also thyroid replacement, or to be
Yeah,
as
if needed, yeah.
optimal as possible. And that can be in a gaining phase as well. Remember, this is all about taking stress off the body. So the thyroid has to work. If you stop
Mhm.
taking the thyroid medication, the thyroid just gets back into action. There's no evidence to suggest that you will shut it down in any way, shape, or form. So, and people have been on
And
thyroid. So.
what about insulin for a beginner? Like, would you start with, for example, a
Wouldn't
beginner
be
just
eating
starts?
enough. Just wouldn't be eating enough. So there's two deployments of insulin, right? First of all, it's prevent you from becoming insulin resistant, pre-diabetic, and overly fat. Now, in enhanced athletes, I'm not actually convinced by the P ratio. For anyone listening who don't understand what the P ratio is, it's essentially the rate at which you accumulate muscle versus fat. And the idea is that at a certain point of fatness, you're gaining more fat than muscle. So it's like a point of diminishing returns. However, while that might be true in the general population, I do not believe it to be true for the enhanced population.
Yeah, even for naturals.
What I do think is that if you get too fat, then you're going to have to diet it all off, and you'll experience diet fatigue, and you probably won't be in your best possible shape because the body gets very stressed
Yeah.
when you diet. There's only so many weeks you can go with poor quality sleep and, you know, excessive amounts of, I mean, you're not recovering, are you? You're doing every single day that you diet, you're beyond your recovery capabilities once you're lean.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, initially you've got body fat to use, but once you're lean and trying to get exotically lean, you cannot do it for long. So
Yeah, for sure. Just like, I think sometimes you have to push things a bit more depending on the people. Like, for example, for me, I have to push things a bit more and get a bit fatter, but I know I can lose fat quite easily. Like, if I want to lose fat and to cut for prep, I lose it quite well, and I can retain muscle mass easily too. So for me, it works, but it cannot work for everybody. And also, something which is very important is like for the P ratio. I think for even for natty or enhanced, anyway, I think you can still gain muscle even if you like the P ratio is not getting worse, because if you train fucking hard, I think muscle mass is still occurring, like accretion, muscle mass accretion. So
yeah, I think really what it would come down to, particularly with natural, is if you accrued so much body fat that your diet was going to be more than the typical natty bodybuilding diet of 6 months, I think you'd spend such a lot of that time with a poor hormonal profile that you would lose all the muscle mass that you'd spent 2-3 years building. So
yeah.
there's something to be said for staying within touching distance for most individuals. But anyway, on the topic of insulin, so we've got our baseline insulin, which is like a background insulin. It's called insulin glargine. Going to be active in the system for about 20 hours, officially 24, but the drop off is to the point where you can say it's active for 20 hours or so. So what we're using that for? Why would type 2 diabetics use it? Simply because their pancreatic function isn't sufficient to keep their blood glucose nice and sort of stable and in the fasted range all day. So if you're eating a whole bunch of carbs and you're lethargic all the time, even without checking your HbA1c or blood glucose measurements are okay, maybe for looking at trending, but essentially you'll know that you're walking around with chronically elevated blood glucose, and that only leads to further insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, diabetes. So at a certain point of carbohydrate consumption for a hard training athlete, we probably would put in some basal insulin. Again, a minimum effective dose could be 10 units when they hit 600 grams of carbs. Probably, if it was me, like the amount I'm active, I probably wouldn't need any until I hit the 800 gram of carb mark. You know, if I do a leg session, I'll probably burn through 200 grams of glycogen. That's I would compare my 2-hour leg session to that of an Olympian, and that's been studied as 200 grams of glycogen needs replacing, and then another 400 grams through the day to move a large body around 15,000 steps. What does my pancreas have to do, really?
Yeah, for sure.
But
Don't need to.
yeah, but then once let's say we take a sedentary individual and their carbs get quite high, body composition hasn't skewed particularly, but they're experiencing lethargy, loss of appetite, the usual things that would indicate chronically elevated blood sugar, maybe irritability as well. And we might start to deploy Lantus insulin. In other countries, it might be a different baseline, but insulin glargine around about that 10 unit mark, and just monitor their biofeedback. You can also, if you're a coach, you can get them tracking their blood sugar, but it's not going to give you a huge amount of information that's useful.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, rapid insulin, and that can also go up to about 20 units depending on the athlete. Like if I was on 1,500 gram of carbs, which probably isn't that far away for me, 20 units of that would be needed to kind of keep my appetite, mood, energy levels. We're just deploying it the way that we would deploy it somebody who is pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic. Now with if we're using rapid insulin as a performance enhancing drug, now we're getting into pretty advanced bodybuilding, because one, we need to keep it away from your growth hormone, because they don't interact favorably. They just compete with some of the same pathways. So a traditional old school protocol is GH plus insulin plus post-workout carbs, and the same pre-workout. And you're not, again, you're deploying drugs, which you can only deploy so much of while not getting the most out of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
A tolerable amount of growth hormone on the upper limit for a big guy might be 8 units, but really, I'd be reticent to go above 6, and that's going to be deployed in probably 2 doses of 3 IUs, which is quite a lot in one bolus. So that only really fits into an off-season context anyway. It's more than is necessary for fat loss. So we're going to keep that away from the rapid insulin. So you've probably got your training window where you might deploy rapid insulin, and that's where you get a bit more like it's a deployment as a PED for nutrient partitioning, for pump, for this hyperemia effect where whatever's in your bloodstream is going directly to the muscle, maybe a little more quickly than it would just via your pancreas alone. So, well, what we might have to consider is how hard the athlete trains as well. So if you're going to be training like you and I train, which is extremely glucose intensive, do I really want a competing hormone taking glucose out of my blood? Or and then I'm drinking intra, like, you know, we've got this balance of like performance versus nutrient partitioning. So I'd be more inclined to give it post-workout to an athlete with a nutrient-dense, easily digesting high carbohydrate meal that they wouldn't otherwise be able to assimilate rapidly enough just because of the bolus of carbs. So let's say they're on a 200 gram carb meal. They've had intra-workout as well, so their body's already started to partition nutrients. It's super insulin sensitive anyway, so then you can bolus between 5 and 10 units of rapid insulin with that meal. And as I said to you, I don't know if we were at the start of the podcast or we were talking beforehand, but you need to bolus your rapid insulin before you start eating a meal, like 20 minutes before, because it starts to become active after 20 minutes. And if you've just trained legs super hard and you're highly insulin sensitive and you eat a very simple carb meal, your body's going to have an insulin response that's probably then, when you add exogenous insulin to that, it's probably going to send you hypoglycemic.
Yeah, very bad hypoglycemia.
Yeah. So insulin, maybe not for beginners, simply because the food requirement's not there. But you could. There's no reason why you couldn't deploy rapid insulin with a post-workout meal. Because even if you
for enhancement.
only had 200 grams of carbs a day, if you put all of those post-workout, you could put that with 5 units of rapid insulin. Why not?
Good.
Well,
let's talk a bit about females.
Yeah, I was going to say the same exists for the females, right?
Let's talk about them.
So for the girls. So the girls, let's work in reverse. Let's ignore the steroids to begin with. And let's build out our PED model. So growth hormone, injectable L-carnitine, metformin, and telmisartan. You've also got some nice anabolic. You get a nice response from clenbuterol even in the off season. That could be something that you deploy there with no real virilization effects. It's sort of kind of a free for all on it, as long as you don't mind a massive burst of adrenaline every day.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And again, then your thyroid replacement drugs as required to optimize, potentially testosterone replacement. And then that will yield very, very good results for most females. That's a huge trajectory, a huge runway of progression there. Huge.
And I will add, like, just if you need it, like, do your blood work, and if you need TRT, just go for it, because it won't, if you're in the physiological range, so if you're not above 1 nanogram per milliliter of testosterone, you'll be all good, no side effects, no androgenic effects, and I think it can really bring a lot. For example, for me, at the end of prep, I couldn't recover my testosterone. I was like 0.2 nanogram per milliliter, and with TRT I was able to go up to 0.8, so it's like 4 times more, which is a lot. And even if I'm not supraphysiological, I can still have better gains because I have more testosterone available and still in the physiological range.
Yeah. And let's talk primarily about what a female physique goal typically looks like. It's not normally to build as much muscle as possible. Most female clients I begin with come to me for fat loss. And women are super adaptive, right? Women are, in a famine, men die really easily. We're not adaptive enough, right? We're expendable. Our bodies keep on going even though our body fat gets really, really low, because we still need to go out and hunt and do all the things that ensure the survival of the species. Meanwhile, the females need to conserve as much body fat as possible. So in a time of famine, your thyroid tanks really quickly, and also your expenditure tanks. And you can track your steps as much as you like, but you can't control the fact that you blink slower, speak slower, move slower, like sit for longer. Your nervous energy just comes right down. And that happens, day 3 of dieting for a female. So females require different dieting strategies, but also, so if the thyroid's tanking, why wouldn't we start off with, let's take the blood work and let's put the thyroid optimally before the diet even commences, and we'll just keep it there. It's not.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's very important.
Check after 4 weeks how close that deployment of the drugs. I prefer combined therapy rather than monotherapy, but okay, let's see how that deployment of T4 or T4 and T3 as where that's put you in the range. Because we can always start off and say, typical replacement dose is this, like a typical TRT dose is this. And then we see in 4 weeks exactly where we sit, and we go, okay, you convert T4 to T3 pretty poorly, so we're going to have to take another half a tab. Fine. When did you have the blood work? Took 3 hours after you took your T3, and your T3 is high. Okay, well, that's pretty normal. We probably won't make any adjustments. Some things to consider.
Yeah.
So for a female, they're going to be, and again, testosterone is going to drop off as well. So if they're already mid to low, just get them straight on replacement, and they'll have a better time of dieting. This would be true of natural male bodybuilders as well. If they were allowed to just keep their testosterone and thyroid in the normal range, they'd be a lot healthier after that diet, rather than just essentially castrating themselves through malnutrition.
Yeah, this is why, like, enhancement versus natty for prep, I think enhancement is a bit healthier. When you just replace stuff, not supraphysiological.
But also thinking about how much body fat you then have to accrue to restore normal hormonal function. In a male, that would be substantial. In a female, that would be very substantial. We're talking maybe 30 to even 40% body fat to restore normal hormonal function after a natural prep in a female. This is also not healthy, and psychologically, it's awful.
I had to go very high after my prep because I couldn't recover my periods. I had to go high with food and body fat to recover them, and it's not easy at all.
Now, using Sarah as an example, because she's simply had TRT and all of the other polypharmacy throughout her entire prep, she's at a low body fat percentage for bikini with no disruption to her menstrual cycle.
Yeah, which is great. It's what you want.
Yeah, I mean, actually, she finds it annoying because she still obviously has the kind of weight fluctuations and things like that. Yeah, she's not the only female I work with who finds her period annoying and would prefer to take more drugs to get rid of it.
Or just not taking any drugs and you lose them because you're just too lean and natty. Like I lose them at 1,800 calories every prep or every cut I do, and that's it. Like I lose them so easily, and it's not healthy to lose them. Like you shouldn't lose them.
No, it's just that I've got a female who she's an older lady, and we thought she was actually probably peri or postmenopausal because she lost her period. But this was actually down to chronic undereating.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And actually her weight had plateaued very dramatically because the amount of stress her body was under, and the adaptive mechanisms. So once we kind of corrected everything, things got moving again. But then she said she got a period back. She was very annoyed. And I said, well, that's great. You know, we've restored your hormonal function on a panel that we thought was probably postmenopausal, and because she was of a certain age, and she's actually wanting to go to figure, and obviously we have to have a conversation about what sort of drug deployment that's likely to take and what the side effects are in terms, you know, the walls of the vagina thinning, the clitoris growing, body hair, voice breaking, inability to have children, many things that we have to go through, including loss of the period. And she was like, that's great. She didn't want it. So okay. You know, situation dependent, just like deployment of birth control can be situation dependent, because although generally I would say that, you know, oral estrogen is deleterious, if your period is absolutely killing you every month and that diminishes it, then this is a happier place for you to be.
Yeah.
So with females, let's get that hormonal profile supported and stable within the normal range for sex hormones and thyroid. And then we can do what we want. And we can deploy all of the other same drugs as well. And then let's talk about what it takes to build a bikini physique when you haven't got and maybe the best genetics for a bikini physique. All right. So some girls will be able to look good for bikini, probably a little bit on the skinnier side, not a huge amount of muscle mass, but just the way their structure is and where they naturally hold muscle, they can probably do bikini naturally.
Yeah, I think so, like 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would they be happier and healthier if we did it with that hormonal support? We're not talking about moving anything outside the normal range, but just supporting it so they don't adapt down over time, yeah, probably happier and healthier,
Yeah, just
and you'll have a
yeah.
better exit from prep. Okay, so, but let's say people want to level up, maybe do pro bikini or pro wellness, and there's the sort of drug deployments there. The First of all, the route of administration sometimes is a determining factor for females, and this is a little bit silly because
Yeah.
injecting is seen as a certain level of use, right? But mostly popping the tablets is what's going to do your damage. Popping Anavar and Winstrol.
Way more side effects, and I think anabolism is less than just like TRT and some primo or masteron.
It absolutely is. And
So
so, okay, we say, okay, we probably got, without any kind of virilization over the entire span of a female's physique career, they want a marketable physique. We're staying within that sort of bikini look, maybe for Instagram, maybe for modeling, maybe for competition. An appropriate deployment would be about 10 milligrams a week of a thoroughly tested breast cancer option like Masteron or Primobolan.
mhm.
About
Mhm.
10 milligrams per day or 70 milligrams per week tops. You could probably start off at about 5 milligrams a day or 35 milligrams per week. And I'd say
Yeah.
a good exposure time would be about 4 weeks. And you could probably repeat that 3 to 4 times a year with, you see, once you start stacking those together, right, you're more likely to start filling up that kind of like cup of virilization. So, I mean, let's just say that when I fill this up as a female with androgens, I start to exhibit signs of virilization, become
Mhm.
masculine. You can never empty that out. So every little bit of so I
Yeah.
better make sure that the end of my career and the start of my career, I'm spreading out my primo. Okay, primo or masteron, they're my best possible choices in terms of bang for my buck. So I'm going to get the most
Yeah.
amount of muscle for that dose. I'll fill that cup up as slowly as possible while making reasonable gains. So that's the only steroid use really needed for bikini or for wellness. Wellness is just a structural difference, and you turn up on
Yeah.
stage more conditioned.
Yeah, and genetics too,
More
I think.
muscular.
Like these wellness girls are crazy genetics for legs. And I think it's also like, yeah, genetics and just like how they train too, maybe, and the amount of drugs they use.
With programming for wellness, it's simple. You're going to train your legs as frequently as they can recover from, and you're going to prioritize.
Yeah.
You're going to prioritize adductors, hamstrings, and glutes, and then you're going to hit quads and calves, and you're going to repeat some form of that workout 3 or 4 times a week, probably three, and then maybe
Yeah.
one upper body session with fairly close to maintenance volumes for delts and lats and chest and arms and abs. And yeah, maybe on the other days you do some ancillary stuff, waist training, yoga, mobility work, or whatever. But
Yeah.
and a bikini split's not going to look particularly much different.
Yeah, they just avoid quads a bit.
You'd have less quads, less adductors,
Yeah.
calves potentially, depending on the individual. But like a similar split, like a lot of lower body, not a lot of upper body, probably prioritizing body parts based on judging feedback. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
she looks good, but she needs more delts. It's okay. Every time she trains legs, she does 3 sets of side raises before she starts, but until the delts are big enough. It's not very hard to program for bikini or for wellness.
Yeah,
To be
no, no, it's
honest,
pretty
we've got
easy.
women
So
have got crazy recovery capabilities for volume. So it's very hard to push them to maximum recoverable volume or beyond that. It's very hard to overreach a female. Very
yeah,
hard.
yeah, I agree. Like we can really go for very high volumes and still recover, and even like training hard with high volume and it's still okay.
I tend to deload females more for a mental break. We do a diet break from whatever we're doing.
Mhm.
So we do maintenance calories and maintenance volumes for a week. usually every 7th week. Now, for a man,
Yeah.
it's an advanced athlete of mine, it's pretty much essential that I rest them every 5th week. And depending on how they train, it's either full rest or deload. Also, depending on how much I trust them to actually do deload volumes, because after about, they're fucked up, but by like day 3 or 4, they start feeling a little bit better, and they overdo
Yes.
it in the gym. Yeah, men are easily overstimulated. You give them a scoop of pre-workout, loud music, and there's an attractive female nearby, and despite they lose their kind of higher brain function.
Yeah, for sure. But like, so for a female, for bikini or wellness, you just go with TRT if needed, thyroid replacement if needed, and some ancillaries like GH, metformin, telmisartan, and Clen potentially.
Yeah, I mean, clenbuterol you could deploy in the off season as well, but definitely in a prep. Definitely, I would.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. Yeah.
like, this is how I would set up a bikini prep for the best possible results. I would start off with optimal testosterone and thyroid. I would start off with a low dose of clenbuterol. I would use 2 units of growth hormone a day, split into 1 unit AM and PM. I would use metformin. I would use telmisartan. I would use injectable L-carnitine at a lowish quantity, like maybe 100 to 200 milligrams to begin with. And some of those things will titrate up over time. But like GH, there's no point because you just don't have the body weight. But clenbuterol can go up. You might potentially flex thyroid up based on blood test results. Testosterone's already optimized. Don't need to worry about that. Injectable L-carnitine could go up to 500 milligrams. That could be deployed pre-fasted cardio and pre-workout for additional mobilization. Metformin and telmisartan aren't going to change. So there's some stuff that you'll build up there, and then I'm going to use some of my exposure to Masteron or Primobolan in the prep, and I probably plan that out over the season. So if that athlete has never had exposure to anabolics before, then maybe about 4 weeks out from their first show, and first and only show, I might deploy Primobolan at 10 milligrams a day.
Okay, so for 4 weeks before the show.
Yeah. And then immediately post-show, I would probably drop it, normalize food and training and everything else. And how they did at the show. And then but by this is our first show, and we're talking about maybe moving to the off season. I've probably got another 8 weeks worth of deployment to use that year. So I'll probably use that towards the end of a macro cycle in every instance. So, training block 1 of 6 weeks went so well. I used my PEDs, I pushed food up, and it's probably in that kind of like 3rd or 4th mesocycle where we're fighting for training progression. We really can't eat any more food, and even sleep quality is maybe beginning to diminish because of stress on the body. Remember, steroids are very, very anti-catabolic. They're very good, like anti-stress. So then we might deploy that in, that 3rd or 4th mesocycle prior to a recovery phase. And we could do that twice in an off season. And then you're on to maybe your next competitive year, and you're thinking about doing the season. So now I might use all 12 weeks of deployment whilst in prep, but not concurrently. So could be in the early stages of the diet, and then like to peak for certain shows. So like with Sarah, she's got a pro qualifier on her Arnold. So we'll be running across that sort of window of the season. She doesn't need it for regionals. For regionals, she doesn't need to win or place. She can just show up.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to deploy, so it's just like smart deployment, if she's doing another important show, so maybe she's got an important show in April, so qualify a regional in March, important show in April, could use Primo for 4 weeks with that, and then that qualifies her for the British, which is 6 months later. we just take some downtime, chill, do our thing, and then start prep for the British. And again, like maybe 4 or 5 weeks out, we start to deploy Primobolan again.
Okay.
Now,
See,
you got
good.
to remember there's like a bit of a window of time where things build up and taper off. So if you started 5 weeks out, you'd probably start to see the impact at 4 weeks out. And you'd probably be at your kind of like your peak use probably by show time, but you probably stopped use a few days to a week before the show. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And because it'll take time to clear out, or you could just risk it for a biscuit and push 5 weeks. You could allow the androgens to taper off post show. That would help with maintaining body composition while increasing food. So
Yeah.
depending on the individual and how they are with their food behaviors, how their season's structured, you'd have to think about where you're going to deploy that. But the main point is like you have a finite amount as a coach to deploy. If you want your athlete to have a full career without pushing them out of their class via masculinization, and what often happens is the coach fails to inform the female that they're going to be, here you go, just take 50 milligrams of Winstrol a day. That's it. Done. One and done. That is your competitive career as a female bikini athlete over. And if you wanted to hang on to your femininity as it was, you've lost it for good. Maybe you got away with, maybe you got away with just a broken voice. Maybe if the training programming was shit, you've now got a super capped pair of delts that you never wanted, As you start deploying anabolics willy-nilly, the female response is strong. And if your training programming is shitty, then you're going to grow body parts exponentially, proportionally incorrectly.
Yeah, because strap and shoulders is quite like I think there are more receptors for androgens, like androgenic receptors, and it just binds and it grows faster than, for example, legs or glutes. Like usually it's what pops out first.
Correct. You could pretty much pick, but just by looking at the male and female bodybuilder, the male and female physique, you could pretty much pick where androgen receptors and estrogen receptors reside, because it's where you're fat and where you're lean. And when you take testosterone, that will simply pop. So yeah, a common, like, is he natty or not? Well, has he got massive traps and delts relative to the rest of his body? But for a female, that probably wouldn't happen just by deployment, because actually we're using fairly mild compounds. So so all I'm saying there really is with a female, like, you are going to increase anabolism very dramatically with quite small amounts of steroids. And if the programming isn't reflective of what she wants her physique to be, a lot of coaches program women like men.
Yeah, which is very, very wrong. Like even drug use like men.
I've seen women on push-pull legs, upper. So where's the lower body weighting on that? I mean, this is just not making sense.
Yeah, I agree.
At all. Sense. A female split is probably the most specialized body part split that you can get. With a man, it's like, yeah, go and train some upper, go and train some lower, see what grows. You can always prioritize a body part later, but you can just basically throw compounds at it. But if I give you bent over rows, bench press, and squat as your main training split, you're going to look like a powerlifter.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree.
If you're training like that, and then I give you steroids on top of that, you're going to very rapidly look like a powerlifter. So this is the responsibility of the coach, or just understanding if you're deploying steroids on your own, reflective of your programming, that whatever you're doing, you're going to get bigger in that area quickly.
Yeah, you have to really specialize on what you want to grow and manage your exercise selection.
And so this leads us to quite an interesting way of deploying anabolics in females, is where we do a body part specialization block in conjunction with that deployment. So what do we want? What do most females want to be the biggest? Glutes. So we've done our diets hormonally supported but not enhanced. It's been
Mm-hmm.
successful. We're in a good position. We've got a good relationship with food. It's time to put on some mass and say, what do you want to build? Glutes. Okay, cool. Let's use Primo for 4 weeks and do a ridiculously aggressive glute specialization block. Let's accumulate glute volume every week at plus 4 sets a week. So you could start off with 4 sets of glutes 3 times a week, and just adding on top of that, 2 sets per workout. That could be so 6 sets a week. It's really aggressive. So you've got a huge amount of progression supported by exposure to anabolics, and you push protein and carbohydrates high. And there you go. After 4 weeks, you'll have a bigger ass. You could have a
Yeah,
rest.
for sure.
You could have a rest for a week. And you could potentially do it again and again. And although you'd have used all of your exposure in close proximity, which I wouldn't recommend,
Yeah, I
you
would say
probably
just take some weeks off,
yeah
even
yeah
month off.
yeah, but essentially within a 15-week to maybe 24-week time frame, depending on how long you want to. Now, let's say 15-week time frame for the drug exposure. Within a 15-week time frame, you could have a ass, and you never need to focus on it again.
Yeah, yeah,
It
for
means
sure.
not doing
Yeah.
a lot of anything else. Maybe touching the upper body with maintenance volumes once a week. But yeah, you'd probably just do hip thrusts, some kind of hip thrust variation, followed by a
Mm-hmm.
squat or a hip hinge variation, and then some ancillary isolation work. Just be aggressive with the volume of the glute accumulation. Yeah, that would be a really effective way to use your exposure to anabolics.
Yeah, and like we've talked about bikini and wellness, but what about figure or women's physique? Like when you really want to build a big amount of muscle mass, your goal is not to stay like small, you want to get big. And as a female, you have to think about, as you said, the duration of exposure and the dose you're exposed to and drug selection. But how would you manage that? Like to with the goal to build as much muscle as you can, with staying feminine as much as you can too.
Same model, absolutely the same model. We will not be using testosterone. What we might do is we might do more frequent exposure to primobolan first. So
Mm-hmm.
let's say we want to push up, and we've given ourselves 12 weeks of exposure. So 4 weeks every. It's not a very good mathematical example, but we've got 12 weeks of exposure for the year. So that's 3 weeks out of 3 months, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or 1 week a month.
Yeah.
But we probably put it in 4 week blocks for it to be effective over a training block.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's better.
So why not add an enhanced training block? So now instead of 3 enhanced training blocks a year, we've got 4 or 5 or 6. All right, but we're still
Mm.
managing the dose and duration of exposure. We've just got less. We don't have such lengthy breaks in between.
Okay.
Then we can look at titrating up dosing. So can we go to 15 milligrams? Can we go to 20 milligrams? How little do we need to achieve the desired look? Remember, you can also increase your growth hormone for hypertrophy
Mm-hmm.
goals as well. You can also deploy insulin as a PD, because again, these are bigger girls who are probably going to be having higher carb requirements. So let's expand on that polypharmacy model as much as possible before reaching for additional steroids. But at some point, I'll tell you now, for figure and beyond, unless you just naturally have the structure, the lines, the body fat percentage, the definition for it, you are going to start pushing into virilization. You see it in figure, you see it in fitness, you see it in all the categories beyond bikini. You see it in wellness, and that is because of poor deployment of PDs, because people are in a rush to get to the Olympia. Simple
Yeah.
as that.
Okay.
Simple as that.
So, like, you would titrate up, for example, like if the female has normal testosterone, you won't use testosterone as testosterone replacement therapy. You don't need it. So, you just have GH, insulin maybe, Met-
Are they on the top end? Are we talking about physique athletes here, or just a general female?
Physique athletes, like competing and wanting to build as much muscle as
Put them
possible.
on
And if you're
put them on the very top end of normal for testosterone and keep them there.
okay, so you keep it there, and then you had Masteron and like Primobolan. But would you start at 35 milligrams a week? You do a cycle, then you assess, and for the next cycle you increase if you can a bit the dose, or you keep it the same all the time, like finding a dose which works, and you just repeat it, or you titrate up.
For what category? Or are we just talking about generally?
For figure or women's physique, like building as much muscle as you can.
You're going to need more than 10 milligrams per day for
Oh,
more than 12 weeks of the year for figure. Yeah,
okay.
but yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. You're probably, I mean, women's bodybuilding at the extreme end, you might be looking at like 300 milligrams of Primo per week.
Wow. Okay.
So maybe 100 to 150. This is the trade-off. You are probably not, unless you're genetically blessed. This is the same for male bodybuilders, right? You can't push the doses to force yourself into a particular class if you just don't have that genetic response to gear without experiencing deleterious side effects. For the men, they're going to die early, and for women, they're going to masculinize or virilize. So it's like, if you need to take that much gear to be in that class, if that's the look that you want, it's a matter of acceptance. Am I going to accept? So if I want to be an open class bodybuilder, but I have to take that much gear, it's going to take 10 years off my life, or 20, or mean that I can never have children, or mean that I'm going to be on TRT for life, or lose a kidney or whatever. Is that worth it? Like, what kind of a pro bodybuilder would I even be? You know? So the answer is it's not. It's stupid. And for a female, you go, okay, am I prepared to give up the chance of having kids? Am I prepared to experience these side effects and manage these side effects and so on in order to have this look? Because you can be a successful pro who takes more gear. And if you're lucky, you'll be a successful pro who can take less gear because you've got better genetics. But some of us won't have the genetics to be a pro, no matter how much gear we take. And
true.
And we shouldn't rush to find that out. We can see how we respond to 5 milligrams a day as a female and 10 milligrams a day. And we can do it for 4 weeks, and we see how we look. You're not going to lose that muscle if you go back to being natural, or even just keeping your hormonal profile optimal. You're going to keep your gains.
Yeah.
It's hard to lose muscle. You do that a few times and just see where you're at. But at a certain point, if you've been doing that for 3 years and your physique's not looking like the class that you want it to look at, probably going to have to consider increasing your dose, and the likelihood of side effects is going to increase.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's a matter of acceptance, isn't it? And a lot of women have made that choice. Well, maybe not a lot, but a certain niche market of women in female bodybuilding have made that choice. I want the muscle, I want that look. So, the voice is broken and they speak with a falsetto,
Wow, yeah. It's crazy. Yeah.
They have to forcibly change their natural speech patterns to pretend that they have a high pitch. Essentially, they've undergone a sex change at a certain point. It's a personal choice.
Yeah, even the face. Like, face is changing too.
So why not? Why not? If that's your aesthetic, if that's what you want, but you have to understand, it's, your genetic response to steroids is what it is. And if you try to force your hand, go too fast, go heavy on the drugs if you think, I'll just blast for a year and then I'll get my pro card and I'll be there, and it won't work. If you can't just blast gear to shit and you'll suddenly morph into Big Ramy. You look at Big Ramy, he was natural, he looked normal. They gave him gear, and a year later, he looked like Big Ramy. This is like the most
Mm.
extreme response to anabolic steroids you'll ever see in your life. He has the most
Yeah,
extreme response to resistance training. He barely has to eat. He eats like half of what I eat. He's 300 pounds. And he's not improved. He maxed out. He maxed out after about 1 year, 2 years of exposure to drugs.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
nothing more to do.
Mm.
Because just taking more drugs doesn't necessarily yield more muscle mass at a certain point. So
Yeah,
even though he has a very strong response to drugs, he'll probably see side effects pretty quickly as well.
yeah. You have diminishing returns at one point.
Yeah, Joe, my coach, Joe describes it as an inverted U. So it's like I'm getting more out of more, out of more, out of more, out of more, out of now I'm getting less out of more, less out of more, less out of more,
Mhm.
less out of more.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now I'm probably going backwards.
Yeah, for sure. And you have plenty of side effects you have to deal with.
Which is why you'd be going back. I mean, once your body's under this amount of stress, you're going to be like in big trouble, right?
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
That's,
Well, I think we can just do a little recap from this podcast. For a male beginner, what can you start with? And for female, and then just close on this.
yeah, absolutely. So don't neglect your polypharmacy. So we do metformin, telmisartan, injectable L-carnitine, growth hormone, potentially thyroid support. Then we do a testosterone check, and if necessary, we put testosterone up to the top end of normal first.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's already pretty normal or close to the top end of normal, then in a male, we might increase that to 200 milligrams and see what happens, to see how far
Yeah,
we get. So all we're looking for is continuous progression for as long as possible while maintaining a favorable body composition and biofeedback as well, I suppose. All right. And at the point where the body composition starts to slide, then we could tidy up the diet or we could
mm-hmm.
increase anabolics, simple as that. And those may come from primobolan, masteron, or anavar for a male. In a
Yeah,
female, we only really deploy steroids in very, very specific circumstances.
yeah, I agree. And TRT, same as male, if you needed TRT, thyroid replacement. And if you want to build muscle, for sure, some Masteron and Primo. But as you said, only like very well managed and thoughtful because you have a limited amount of time for exposure and dose until you have virilization side effects. And they are quite irreversible. So think about it. Like, do you want to have like hair, like facial hair, deep voice, inability to have kids for your whole life, or like is it more important than just bodybuilding? So you have to think about it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should point out that like deployment of primobolan at 5 to 10 milligrams a day for a duration of 4 weeks is really not going
Of
to do
course.
you any harm. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
so
it should
it's
be
once
fine.
you start exceeding that kind of dose and duration and frequency of exposure that you're going to start to run into more issues. So again, it's physique enhancement done smart and appropriate to the goal. For a female beginner, no real need to touch steroids unless maybe if I took one as a coach and I'm like, fuck, this is a natty, and like
Mm-hmm.
maybe we're going to take a pro card if we put her enhanced this year. Like maybe she'll have a career because I've just found a genetic marvel. But
Mm-hmm.
in most beginners, in most circumstances, no, I wouldn't use any anabolics with a female.
Yeah, yeah, for
I
sure. I
would
totally
use
agree.
testosterone replacement and even optimized testosterone, but I wouldn't reach for the anabolics.
Yeah, yeah, like touch Primo and Masteron only if you have a specific goal and you need to build a lot of muscle mass. That's it. If not, you don't need it.
No, don't necessarily need it for dieting. That's probably very
Mm.
contentious whether you use that or not. That'd be more around looking your absolute best for something like a pro bikini show. I would use it when I would get the benefit out of it. So I'm stable at home. I'm able to eat a lot of food. I'm able to train consistently hard. Then I would deploy that and I would build the most muscle possible.
Good. Well, I think we're done for today. Just where can people reach you if they want to go for a coaching with you?
Just write me on Instagram. It's at Thom, like Thomas, so THOM .evans .ifbb. And yeah, you can just DM me on there and we can talk about coaching or just general PhD advice. I do a lot of consultations, obviously, and podcasts on this particular topic, so they can reach me for those things as well. Not everybody wants coaching, but sometimes they want somebody to just tell them, okay, this is a sensible drug model and this is how you can deploy it, or no, that's stupid, or I fucked myself up. What do I need to change?
Yeah, yeah. So just consults.
Consults I do a lot of, particularly with like women with a poor hormonal profile. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's really easy to correct, but doctors just won't do it.
Yeah.
And then they can
Well,
actually
great.
reach their
Well,
physique goals, without that handicap of low test and low thyroid and such like.
yeah, which is bad, which is very bad. I will write everything down in the description so they can reach you like very easily on Physique Collective too. I think so. I think they can just write you there if they are on the
Physiquecollective.com.
website.
Yeah, the website's physiquecollective.com. It's also an app, the Physique Collective app. And yeah, I have a blog on there. They can reach me on there. They can book consultations through the website as well. But in terms of response time, probably the best way to reach me is Instagram.
Good. Okay. Well, thanks. Thanks a lot for your time. And yeah, thanks. It was very interesting. You brought a lot of information, knowledge. So thanks a lot.
That's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Bye.